The admiral of the Haelor Empire clearly didn't know who the fuck he was dealing with when he fired on the TDS Indomitable, Captain Wayne Cook's ship, and he would regret that mistake until his dying breath. As the human Valiant-class cruiser traversed the edge of Terran space on a routine patrol, sensors pinged with an unknown contact. Data showed it was a Lemnorian warship, the LES Sagan, a massive Devastator-class ship bristling with enough firepower to glass a planet. "Hail them," Cook ordered. He straightened his uniform, preparing to address the alien commander. But before he could speak a word, emerald beams lashed out from the battle cruiser. The Indomitable shuddered as enemy fire slammed into her shields. "Shields at 60%, an officer called out. "Weapon systems damaged." The Lemnorians had caught them with their pants down, and they packed one hell of a punch. Cook gripped the armrests of his chair as another volley rocked the ship. He had to act fast. 400 human lives were in his hands, men and women who had signed up to defend Earth, not to die in the far reaches of space at the hands of some trigger-happy aliens. "Ours, analyze that thing. I want to know its weak points," Cook barked at the ship's AI. He opened a ship-wide channel. "This is your captain. We're under attack by an unknown enemy, but we're not going down without a fight. Man your stations and give 'em hell." A chorus of affirmations echoed back. He allowed himself a small smile. Terrans didn't run from a battle. As more plasma fire pummeled the shields, a grim realization set in. The Lemnorian technology was beyond anything the Terran Dominion had encountered. This fight would push the Indomitable and her crew to their limits. But Cook was a seasoned veteran. He had stared down the barrels of enemy ships before and come out victorious. He would do it again. He had to. Because if the Indomitable fell here, the Lemnorians would sense weakness. They would push further into human space, subjugating world after world under their brutal rule. Billions of human lives hung in the balance. The fate of the Terran Dominion itself might very well depend on the actions Cook took in the next few minutes. Cook watched the tactical display with razor-sharp focus as the battle raged on. The Lemnorians were putting up one hell of a fight. Their ship maneuvered with surprising agility for its size, dodging the Indomitable's volleys and retaliating with brutal precision. A sudden realization hit Cook like a punch to the gut. The bastards were targeting their engines. They wanted to disable the Indomitable, probably capture it for study. Like hell he'd let that happen. "Aye, Captain," the chief engineer responded, sacrificing speed for durability and firepower. Cook turned to the ship's AI. "Ares, I want you to zero in on the Sagan's weapon systems. Take those fuckers out." "Affirmative, Captain," the AI replied coolly, targeting enemy offensive capabilities. The Indomitable's advanced systems locked onto the Lemnorian ship, pouring fire into its weapon arrays. Explosions blossomed across the Sagan's hull as the concentrated assault took its toll. But the Lemnorian commander wasn't about to roll over. The bastard had a few tricks up his sleeve. A swarm of torpedoes burst from the Sagan, speeding toward the Indomitable on erratic trajectories. "Captain, detecting quantum-entangled signatures," Ares reported. "Those projectiles can bypass our shields." "Davis," Cook shouted to his tactical officer, "light up those torpedoes with point defense. Don't let a single one through." The Indomitable's lasers flared to life, intercepting the incoming warheads in a dazzling display of destruction. Most of the torpedoes were reduced to harmless debris, but a handful slipped past the defenses. The ship shuddered violently as the projectiles slammed into its port side. Alarms blared, and damage reports flooded in. They were hurting, but still in the fight. Suddenly, a priority message from High Command flashed on Cook's display. His eyes widened as he read the contents. The Lemnorians had launched a full-scale offensive along the border. The Indomitable was the only ship close enough to respond. Cook's mind raced. He could continue slugging it out with the Sagan, but that risked the destruction of his ship and crew. Or he could retreat, leaving the border defenseless and millions of Terran lives at the mercy of the Lemnorians. It was an impossible choice, but one he had to make. The fate of the Terran Dominion rested on his shoulders. Cook clenched his jaw, his decision crystallizing with grim clarity. Cook, his mind racing through years of battle-hardened experience, hatched a plan that just might turn the tide. He spun to face Ares' avatar. "I need you to tear into the Sagan's shield harmonics. Find me a chink in their armor." "On it, Captain," Ares replied, his digital voice steady. Seconds later, a schematic of the Lemnorian ship flashed onto the main display, a flashing red section highlighting a vulnerability near the shield generators. There, a fluctuation in their ventral shielding. Cook grinned. They had their shot. He opened a direct line to weapons control. "Martinez, pour everything we've got into their belly. Aim for those shield generators and don't let up." "With pleasure, sir," Martinez responded, a hint of savage joy in his tone. The deck shuddered as the Indomitable's plasma cannons roared to life, hurling sun-bright bolts of energy at the Sagan's exposed underbelly. The Lemnorian ship's shields flared, desperately trying to repel the onslaught, but they were no match for the Indomitable's focused fire. Cook watched with grim satisfaction as the enemy's defenses crumbled, explosions blossoming across the Sagan's hull. On the Lemnorian bridge, Admiral Craxtor slammed a fist onto his command chair as alarms wailed around him. "Shields failing. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. He knew they couldn't withstand much more of this. With a growl of frustration, he barked an order to his navigator. "Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. We're getting out of here." But Cook had anticipated this move. "Ares, activate the gravity well projector. Don't let them slip away." "Gravity well engaging," Ares confirmed. A subtle vibration ran through the Indomitable as the projector came online, creating a localized distortion that would prevent the Sagan from entering hyperspace. Craxtor's eyes widened as his ship shuddered. The jump aborted. They were trapped at the mercy of the Terran vessel's guns. The Indomitable pressed its advantage, pouring plasma fire into the crippled Lemnorian ship. The Sagan's hull buckled and tore, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. "Captain, we're being hailed," Ares reported. "It's Admiral Craxtor." Cook narrowed his eyes. "On screen." The Lemnorian admiral's face filled the display, his features contorted with equal parts rage and desperation. "Terran vessel, cease fire. I demand you halt your attack and discuss terms of our surrender." Cook leaned forward, his voice cold. "I don't think so, Admiral. Your people can't be trusted. Here are my terms. Abandon your ship immediately and prepare to be taken into custody. Your crew are now prisoners of war." Craxtor's jaw clenched, but he knew he had no choice. With a curt nod, he signaled his defeat. "Very well, Terran, we will comply." "Right away, Captain," Baines acknowledged, already moving to carry out the order. As the Indomitable's security teams rushed to prepare for boarding the Lemnorian escape pods, Ares's voice crackled urgently over the bridge speakers. "Captain, I'm detecting a massive energy surge from the Sagan's core. Their reactor is going critical." He slammed the comm button. "Johnson, abort the boarding op. Get your men back on the Indomitable now." Not waiting for a response, Cook spun to Lieutenant Thompson at the helm. "Sarah, full reverse thrust. Put some distance between us and that ship." The Indomitable's engines roared as the ship strained to pull away from the doomed Sagan. Cook gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white as he watched the readouts. They were cutting it damn close. Suddenly, the Sagan exploded in a blinding flash. A massive shockwave slammed into the Indomitable, throwing the crew against their restraints. Alarms blared as the ship shuddered under the impact. Cook held on grimly until the turbulence subsided. "Damage report." "Shields held, Captain," Ares reported. "No hull breaches, we're clear." Cook let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That had been too close, but his crew was safe. That was what mattered. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the tactical display. The Lemnorian escape pods drifted in the debris field left by the Sagan's destruction. "Johnson," Cook said into the comm, "tractor beam those pods into the hangar bay. I want the survivors taken into custody." "Understood, Captain," Johnson replied. "We'll have them secured in no time." As the pods were drawn into the Indomitable, Cook rose from his chair. "Ares, you have the bridge. I'm going down there. I want to look that Lemnorian bastard in the eye." Cook strode into the hangar bay, flanked by a squad of armed security personnel. The Lemnorian pods sat in a neat row, their hatches hissing open. Lemnorian crew members emerged, their hands raised in surrender. And there in the center was Admiral Craxtor himself. The once proud Lemnorian commander looked haggard, his uniform torn and scorched, but there was still a defiant glint in his eye as he met Cook's gaze. "What now, Terran?" Craxtor spat. "What fate do you have in store for us?" Cook stepped forward until he was face to face with the Admiral. "You'll be treated as prisoners of war, in accordance with Terran law. You and your crew will be held in our brig until we can transfer you to a secure facility." Craxtor's lip curled. "And then what? Torture? Execution?" Cook met his glare unflinchingly. "We're not barbarians, Craxtor. You'll be interrogated, yes, but you'll be treated fairly. You have my word on that." The Lemnorian held his gaze for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Very well, Terran. We're your prisoners." Cook turned to Johnson. "Commander, escort the prisoners to the brig. Set up a rotation to guard them around the clock. I want them under constant surveillance." "Yes, sir," Johnson said crisply. He gestured to his men, who began to herd the Lemnorians out of the hangar bay. As Cook watched them go, his mind raced with the implications of this encounter. The Lemnorians had been willing to destroy their own ship rather than let it fall into Terran hands. What secrets were they so desperate to protect? He needed answers. And one way or another he would get them from Craxtor and his crew. The fate of the Terran Dominion depended on it. As the Lemnorian prisoners were led away to the brig, Cook strode purposefully through the corridors of the Indomitable. The ship had taken a beating, but she was still in one piece. Cook needed to assess the damage and get his ship back in fighting shape. He found Lieutenant Commander Jack Harper in engineering, poring over a holographic display of the ship's systems. "Harper, give me a status report." Harper looked up, his face grim. "We took some heavy hits, Captain. Shields are down to 30% and we've got hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, but the damage is manageable. We can have her operational again in a few hours." Cook nodded. "Focus on weapons and propulsion first. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." As Harper and his team set to work, Cook headed back to the bridge. He had barely settled into his chair when Ares's avatar flickered to life. "Captain, we're receiving an encrypted transmission from High Command. Priority 1. Cook frowned. "Put it through." He leaned forward as the message began to play, his eyes scanning the lines of code. What he read made his blood run cold. The Lemnorians had been holding back. The attack on the Indomitable was just a prelude to something far worse. High Command believed that the Haelor Empire had developed a new weapon, codenamed Project Exodus. The details were scarce, but one thing was clear. If the Lemnorians were allowed to deploy this weapon, it could spell the end of the Terran Dominion. Cook's orders were simple. Take the Indomitable deep into Lemnorian space, find out everything he could about Project Exodus, and, if possible, destroy it before it could be used against humanity. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This was a mission unlike any he had faced before. The stakes couldn't be higher, but he wasn't about to back down from a fight. "Kers, analyze that data. I want every scrap of intel we have on Lemnorian space. Potential targets, infiltration routes, anything that might give us an edge." "Yes, Captain." The AI's voice was steady, reassuring. "I'll have a full report ready within the hour." Cook nodded. "Good. In the meantime, assemble the team. I want Johnson, Davis, and Martinez in the briefing room in 10. As Ares set to work, Cook rose from his chair. He had a mission to plan and not a moment to lose. The briefing room was silent as Cook laid out the details of their mission. His hand-picked team listened intently, their faces a mix of determination and apprehension. He met each of their gazes in turn. "Johnson, you'll be leading the ground team. If we need to put boots on the ground, I'm counting on you to get the job done." Johnson nodded, his jaw set. You can count on us, Captain. Davis Martinez, you'll be providing tactical support from the Indomitable. We need to be ready for anything out there. Cook allowed himself a small smile. He had the best damn crew in the Terran fleet. With them at his side, he knew they could pull this off. All right, people, let's get to work. We have a weapon to find and a war to win. As the team filed out of the briefing room, Cook felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The fate of the Terran Dominion rested in their hands, but he wouldn't have it any other way. He strode onto the bridge, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The stars stretched out before them, an endless expanse of possibility and danger. Gargies lay in a course for Lemnorian space. It's time to take the fight to the enemy. The Indomitable leapt forward, engines blazing as it tore through the void. Cook settled into his chair, ready for whatever lay ahead. The Haelor Empire wouldn't know what hit them. Cook's fingers danced across the helm controls of the captured Lemnorian shuttle. His eyes narrowed in concentration behind the stolen uniform's visor. The disguise felt foreign against his skin, but he pushed the discomfort aside. Everything hinged on their ability to infiltrate the research station undetected. Lieutenant Davis, Lieutenant Commander Johnson, and Lieutenant Commander Martinez took their positions in the cramped cockpit, each adjusting their own Lemnorian disguises with practiced efficiency. They had drilled this moment countless times, memorizing every detail of their cover identities. As the shuttle approached the looming structure of the research station, Cook's heart pounded in his chest. He forced his breathing to remain steady, his voice even as he transmitted the stolen security codes. Research Station Zeta. This is Shuttle Epsilon 9 requesting permission to dock. Transmitting authorization now. Seconds ticked by, each one an eternity as they waited for a response. Then the comm crackled to life. Shuttle Epsilon 9, you are cleared for landing in Bay 3. Welcome back. Cook allowed himself a small sigh of relief before responding. Acknowledged. Research Station Zeta, proceeding to Bay 3. The shuttle glided into the hangar, settling onto the deck with a gentle thud. As the team disembarked, they were greeted by a contingent of Lemnorian researchers, led by a tall, wiry figure with piercing violet eyes. I am Dr. Zaxir, lead scientist on Project Exodus, the Lemnorian said, his tone clipped and precise. I was not informed of any scheduled security inspections. Cook stepped forward, his posture straight and confident. Dr. Zaxir, I apologize for the short notice. We were dispatched urgently to assess the facility's defenses in light of recent Terran incursions into our space. I have authorization documents here. He held out a datapad, the falsified orders displayed on its screen. Zaxir's eyes narrowed as he examined the documents, his long fingers scrolling through the text. After a moment he looked up, his expression still guarded but less hostile. Very well. I will escort you and your team personally. We cannot afford any lapses in security. As Zaxir led Cook and Davis deeper into the facility, Johnson and Martinez exchanged a quick glance. It was time to put their own part of the plan into motion. The pair slipped away from the main group, their movements swift and silent as they navigated the maze-like corridors of the research station. Johnson's eyes flicked to the holomap displayed on his wrist, guiding them towards the heart of Project Exodus. They reached a heavily fortified door, its surface a seamless expanse of reinforced alloy. Martinez pulled a small device from his belt, attaching it to the door's control panel. The device whirred and clicked, its quantum decryption algorithms tearing through the Lemnorian security protocols. With a hiss of pneumatics, the door slid open, revealing a cavernous laboratory filled with pulsing machinery and towering stasis tanks. In the center of it all, a massive, pulsating sphere of energy hung suspended in a web of crackling containment fields. Jackpot, Martinez whispered, his eyes wide. That must be the core of Project Exodus. Johnson nodded grimly, already pulling a set of compact explosive charges from his pack. Let's get to work, we don't have much time. As the two officers set about planting the charges, Cook and Davis continued their tour with Dr. Zaxir, their eyes and ears absorbing every scrap of information they could glean. Cook engaged the scientist in conversation, his questions carefully crafted to probe for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Dr. Zaxier, I must say I'm impressed by the scale of this operation. How close are you to a functional prototype? Zaxier's chest swelled with pride as he launched into a detailed explanation of Project Exodus's progress, his words a goldmine of technical specifications and development timetables. Davis, meanwhile, used the distraction to discreetly scan the facility with a concealed imager, mapping out its layout and security systems. He placed a series of thumbnail-sized surveillance devices at key junctures, each one blending seamlessly into the walls and ceilings. As the tour wound to a close, Cook's comm chirped softly in his ear. It was Johnson, his voice tight with urgency. "Captain, charges are set. We need to extract now." Cook nodded almost imperceptibly, his expression betraying nothing. He turned to Zaxier with a polite smile. "Thank you for the tour, Doctor. Your work here is truly impressive. We'll be sure to include your diligence in our report." The team regrouped at the shuttle, their faces tense with anticipation as they strapped in and prepared for launch. Cook's hands flew over the controls, coaxing the small craft out of the hangar and into the void. As the research station receded behind them, Cook allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. They had done it. Project Exodus was crippled, its secrets laid bare for the Terran Dominion to exploit. But even as they sped away from the Lemnorian base, Cook knew that their mission was far from over. The Haelor Empire would not take this blow lightly. They would retaliate, and the Indomitable needed to be ready. Cook's jaw tightened as he plotted a course back to Terran space, his mind already racing with the challenges that lay ahead. As Cook and his team raced towards the shuttle, alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Lemnorian soldiers stormed into the hangar bay, pulse rifles blazing. "They've detected the explosives," Cook shouted over the din of gunfire. "Martinez, blow the charges." Martinez nodded, his fingers flying over the detonator. A second later, a massive explosion rocked the facility. Fire and debris erupted from the research labs. Soldiers stumbled, disoriented. Johnson charged into the fray, a blur of motion. His plasma knife flashed, slicing through armor, flesh and bone. Lemnorians screamed as he cut them down with brutal efficiency. Davis and Martinez followed close behind, laying down suppressing fire. The air sizzled with energy bolts and the stench of burnt flesh. A hulking shape emerged from the smoke, a Lemnorian mech, its energy cannon glowing with deadly intent. It swiveled towards Cook, preparing to fire. "Davis!" Cook bellowed. "Hack that thing!" Davis whipped out her hacking tool. Her fingers danced over the keypad as enemy fire pinged off her armor. Sweat beaded her brow. The mech's cannon whined, about to discharge. At the last second, Davis looked up, triumph in her eyes. "Got it!" The mech shuddered, then detonated in a blinding flash. Shrapnel pinged off the team's armor as they sprinted for the shuttle ramp. "Strap in!" Cook leaped into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. The shuttle lifted off, thrusters roaring. Lemnorian fighters screamed in pursuit, laser cannons blazing. The shuttle shuddered as bolts slammed into its shields. "Shields at 30%!" Martinez called out, hands tight on the weapon controls. He triggered the rear cannons, sending lances of energy back at their pursuers. One fighter vanished in a ball of flame. Cook wrenched the controls, sending the shuttle into a gut-wrenching roll. Laser blasts flashed past, barely missing. "Indomitable, this is Cook," he shouted into the comm. "We are under heavy fire and need immediate extraction." "Roger that, Captain," came the response. "Fighter squadrons launching now." Terran fighters streaked past the shuttle, energy cannons flashing. They tore into the Lemnorian formation with ruthless precision. Cook angled the shuttle towards the Indomitable's hangar bay, the fighters covering their approach. Laser bolts and missiles crisscrossed around them as the dogfight raged. The shuttle slammed into the hangar deck, skidding in a shower of sparks. The team leaped out, rushing to safety as the bay doors slammed shut behind them. With a flash of light, The Indomitable snapped back into real space, its battered hull still smoldering from the Lemnorian assault. Cook slumped back in his chair, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. They had cut it damn close back there. "Captain, we're safe," Ares reported. "No sign of Lemnorian pursuit." Cook nodded. "Good work, everyone. That was a hell of a fight." He turned to his team, pride swelling in his chest as he saw their weary but determined faces. "Johnson, Martinez, Davis, you did a hell of a job down there. The Dominion owes you a debt." Johnson cracked a grin. "All in a day's work, sir." Cook straightened, the weight of command settling back onto his shoulders. "Ares, set a course for the rendezvous point. I need to debrief High Command." As the AI plotted their route through the twisting hyperspace lanes, Cook gathered his officers in the briefing room. For hours, they pored over every scrap of data they had gathered, analyzing schematics, dissecting Lemnorian communications, trying to piece together the full scope of Project Exodus. Cook compiled their findings into an encrypted data packet, his fingers flying over the keys as he added his own recommendations, strategies for a preemptive strike against key Lemnorian facilities. When he was done, he fired off the report to High Command, praying it would reach them in time. Hours turned into days as the Indomitable traversed the vast emptiness between stars. Cook spent the time in preparation, running drills with his crew, fine-tuning battle plans with his officers. He knew that whatever came next, they had to be ready. "Captain, we're approaching the rendezvous point," Ares announced, jolting Cook from his thoughts. "The fleet is coming into view." Cook strode onto the bridge, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the assembled might of the Terran Dominion stretching out before him. Dozens of ships hung in the void, their hulls bristling with weaponry, and there, at the center of it all, was the TDS Victorious, a dreadnought of unparalleled power. Cook straightened his uniform, on screen. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a woman with steely eyes and a face lined with experience. "Captain Cook," she said, her voice crisp. "Damn fine work out there. The intelligence you gathered will be invaluable in the coming fight." Cook inclined his head. "Thank you, Admiral. The Indomitable and her crew stand ready to serve." Ivanova leaned forward. "I'll cut to the chase, Cook. We're launching an offensive against the Lemnorians, a chance to hit them hard and fast before they can unleash Project Exodus, and I want the Indomitable on the front lines." Cook felt a thrill run through him, a chance to take the fight to the enemy, to make them pay for every Terran life they had taken. "We won't let you down, Admiral." "I know you won't." Ivanova's gaze was unwavering. "Get your ship in formation. We move out at 800. Ivanova out." As the screen went dark, Cook turned to his crew, seeing his own determination mirrored in their eyes. They were ready for this, ready to face whatever the Lemnorians threw at them. But as Cook stared out at the assembled fleet, a flicker of doubt crept into his heart. The Haelor Empire was a formidable foe, their technology advanced, their ships numerous. The Terrans would be outnumbered and outgunned in the battles to come. But they didn't need technological superiority to win this war. They had something far more powerful. They had the courage and tenacity of the human spirit, that indomitable will that had propelled their species to the stars and beyond. Cook thought back to all they had endured, the Lemnorian ambush, the desperate battle aboard the Sagan, the heart-stopping infiltration of the research station. Through it all, his crew had stood firm, facing each challenge with unwavering resolve. And now, as they stood on the precipice of the greatest battle of their lives, Cook knew that same spirit would see them through. They would fight, they would bleed, they would die if they had to, but they would not fail. They could not fail. For the sake of the Terran Dominion, for the billions of lives counting on them, failure was not an option. Cook straightened, squaring his shoulders as he faced the view screen, the swirling vortex of hyperspace reflecting in his eyes. Whatever lay ahead, whatever trials and sacrifices the future held, he was ready to face it. They all were. The Indomitable powered forward, taking its place in the formation as the fleet prepared to make the jump to Lemnorian space. Cook took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling on him. This was it. The calm before the storm, the deep breath before the plunge. In a blinding flash, the fleet vanished into hyperspace, hurtling towards a battle that would decide the fate of the galaxy, and Captain Cook and the crew of the Indomitable were at the forefront, ready to lead the charge into the very jaws of hell itself. The void of space erupted into a maelstrom of destruction as the Terran Dominion and Lemnorian fleets clashed in a titanic battle. Fighters swarmed like angry hornets, pulse cannons flared, and missiles streaked through the darkness, leaving trails of fire in their wake. At the heart of the chaos, the Indomitable surged forward, its guns blazing. Cook, strapped into the cockpit of his Raptor fighter, danced through the explosions and debris, his fingers flying over the controls. "Raven Squadron, form up on me," he barked into the calm. "We're going after their command ship." A chorus of acknowledgement sounded in his ear as his squadron mates fell into formation behind him. They sliced through the battle, plasma cannons tearing into Lemnorian hulls and sending enemy fighters spinning into oblivion. But the Lemnorians weren't about to roll over. A swarm of heavily armed frigates, bristling with torpedo launchers and pulse cannons, burst through the Terran lines, making a beeline for the Indomitable. "Damn it!" Cook hissed. "Raven Squadron, break off, intercept those frigates!" They peeled away, afterburners flaring as they raced to head off the Lemnorian ships. Pulsefire stitched the void, missiles streaking from the Raptor's launch tubes. But it wasn't enough. The frigates, piloted by fanatics determined to sacrifice themselves for their cause, ploughed through the barrage. They slammed into the Indomitable's hull, explosions blossoming across its armoured surface. The battlecruiser shuddered under the impact, alarms screaming and damage reports flooding in. "Captain!" Ares' voice crackled over the comm. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Main reactor is offline. We're dead in the water." Cook's jaw tightened. They were out of options. "All hands abandon ship," he ordered, his voice steady despite the desperation clawing at his chest. "Get to the escape pods, now." He watched on his display as pods began to jettison from the crippled ship, carrying his crew to safety, but he couldn't join them. Not yet. Lemnorian boarding craft were already latching onto the Indomitable's hull, disgorging squads of heavily armed soldiers. Someone had to buy time for the escape pods to get clear. Cook launched his Raptor from the hangar bay, swinging the nimble craft back towards the Indomitable. He slammed it into the battlecruiser's hull, next to one of the breaches, and vaulted from the cockpit, pulse rifle in hand. The corridors were choked with smoke and the stench of burning metal. Cook charged through the haze, his rifle spitting death. Lemnorian soldiers fell before him, their armor no match for his precise shots. More poured in, plasma fire sizzling past Cook's head. He ducked into a side passage, priming a grenade and tossing it around the corner. The explosion shook the deck, screams echoing in its wake. But there were too many. They kept coming, an endless tide of Lemnorian steel and fanaticism. Cook fell back, trading shots, his rifle growing hot in his hands. He reached the reactor room, the ship's heart now dark and silent. A quick check of his display showed the escape pods were away. His crew was safe. Kirk input his command override into the reactor control panel. He set the core to overload, a detonation that would vaporize the Indomitable and take a good chunk of the Lemnorian fleet with it. Plasma fire sizzled over his head as the Lemnorian soldiers stormed into the reactor room. Cook spun, his rifle bucking in his hands. Soldiers fell, but more took their place, a wall of armor and weapons. Cook's rifle clicked empty. He let it drop, drawing his combat knife from his boot. He leapt forward, the blade flashing in the emergency lights. He fought like a man possessed, the knife darting and slicing, finding gaps in armor, leaving a trail of Lemnorian blood in his wake. But for every soldier he cut down, 2 more took their place. Plasma bolts seared into his armor, burning through to the flesh beneath. Cook gritted his teeth against the pain, his knife hand slick with blood, both Lemnorian and his own. A final glance at the countdown on the reactor control. 3 seconds. Kirk hurled himself at the Lemnorians, a battle cry on his lips, the knife flashing in his hand. The reactor detonated. A blinding flash, a roar that shook the stars. The Indomitable vanished in a sun-bright ball of plasma, taking a dozen Lemnorian ships with it. In the silence that followed, the Terran Dominion fleet surged forward, the sacrifice of the Indomitable and her captain giving them new resolve. They tore into the Lemnorians, pulse cannons and plasma lances, turning the void into a hellscape of fire and shrapnel. The Lemnorians fought back with the fury of the desperate, but it was no use. Their lines crumbled, their ships falling one by one. The Terran Dominion pressed the attack, chasing down every last enemy vessel, giving no quarter. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The last Lemnorian ship vanished in a bloom of fire, and the battlefield fell still. The Terran Dominion had won, but the cost had been high. The Indomitable pride of the fleet was gone, along with her captain and crew. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The heart of the Lemnorian war machine had been ripped out, their secret weapon destroyed before it could be unleashed. In the aftermath of the climactic battle against the Lemnorians, the Terran Dominion wasted no time in pressing its advantage. The captured enemy leaders, Admiral Craxtor and Dr. Zaxir among them, were subjected to intense interrogation, their secrets pried from them one by one. In stark rooms lit by harsh, unforgiving light, Terran intelligence operatives grilled the prisoners relentlessly. Admiral Craxtor, once proud and defiant, now sat slumped in his chair, his spirit broken. Under the skilled questioning of his interrogators, he revealed the full scope of Project Exodus, the Haelor Empire's audacious plan to subjugate the galaxy under Lemnorian rule. Dr. Zaxir, though more resilient, eventually cracked as well. His scientific brilliance, once devoted to the creation of terrible weapons, now served the Terran Dominion's cause. He laid bare the technical details of Project Exodus, the weaknesses that could be exploited, the supply lines that could be severed. Armed with this precious intelligence, the Terran Dominion High Command set to work. In secret war rooms and shadowed council chambers, the greatest military minds of the human race crafted a strategy to counter the Lemnorian threat. They knew that the war was far from over, that the Haelor Empire would not rest until humanity was crushed beneath its heel. To meet this challenge, they created a new weapon of their own. Not a machine of metal and fire, but a force of flesh and blood and indomitable will. They called it the Cook's Commandos, named for the fallen hero who had sacrificed everything to give humanity a fighting chance. To lead this elite unit, they chose Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hawkins, one of the few survivors of the Indomitable's final stand. She had fought at Cook's side, witnessed his bravery and his sacrifice. Now she would carry on his legacy. In a solemn ceremony, Hawkins was promoted to the rank of captain, the weight of her new responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle of iron. As she looked out over the sea of faces, the men and women who would now follow her into the jaws of hell, she felt a flicker of doubt. Could she live up to Cook's example? Could anyone? But then she remembered the look in Cook's eyes in those final moments, the unwavering determination, the absolute refusal to yield. And she knew that she could do no less. With a nod to her troops, Captain Hawkins set about the task of forging them into a weapon fit to strike at the heart of the Haelor Empire. They trained relentlessly, day and night, pushing themselves to the limits of human endurance and beyond. They became ghosts, moving unseen through enemy territory, striking without warning, and fading away before the Lemnorians could mount a response. And then the call came. The Cook's Commando's first mission, a daring raid on a critical Lemnorian supply depot. The target was heavily guarded, ringed with defenses both physical and technological, but Hawkins and her team were undeterred. As the drop ship hurtled through the atmosphere of the Lemnorian world, Captain Hawkins felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of the lives under her command, the knowledge that some of them might not return, the memory of all those who had already fallen, Cook foremost among them. But she pushed those thoughts aside. She had a job to do, a mission to complete. She would not let her fallen comrades down. The dropship touched down in a spray of dirt and debris. the hatch slamming open to reveal the chaos of the battlefield beyond. Plasma fire crisscrossed the air, the screams of the wounded and the dying mingling with the bark of orders and the roar of explosions. Captain Hawkins was the first one out, her rifle up and spitting death. Her commandos fanned out behind her, a well-oiled machine of destruction. They surged forward, pressing towards the heart of the Lemnorian compound, their every movement precise and purposeful. Hawkins led from the front always. A plasma bolt seared past her head, close enough to singe her hair. She didn't flinch, didn't break stride. Her rifle bucked in her hands, a Lemnorian soldier falling before her onslaught. They breached the compound's outer defenses, then the inner. Lemnorian resistance grew fiercer with every step, the enemy soldiers throwing themselves at the humans with desperate abandon. But the Cook's commandos would not be denied. With ruthless efficiency, they secured the supply caches, planting explosive charges at key structural points. And then they were gone, vanishing into the smoke and the fire as swiftly as they had come. The charges detonated as the dropship clawed for the sky, the shockwave buffeting the small craft. Captain Hawkins allowed herself a small smile as she watched the Lemnorian compound collapse in on itself, a plume of fire and debris rising into the heavens. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a start, a message to the Haelor Empire and to the galaxy at large. The Terran Dominion would not go quietly into the night. They would fight, and they would win, no matter the cost. As the dropship docked with the waiting frigate, Captain Hawkins was already planning the next mission in her head. There was so much work still to do, so many battles still to fight. But then, as she stepped onto the frigate's deck, she was met by a grim-faced intelligence officer. He thrust a datapad into her hands, the screen flickering with a stream of intercepted Lemnorian communications. Hawkins' eyes widened as she read the decrypted messages. The Haelor Empire was not resting on its laurels. Even as the Cook's commandos struck at their supply lines, the Lemnorian scientists were hard at work on a new weapon, one that dwarfed even the terrible power of Project Exodus. A cold knot formed in the pit of Hawkins' stomach. The road ahead would be harder than she had ever imagined, but she knew with a certainty that burned like a star in her chest that she and her commandos would meet this challenge as they had met all the others. For they were the Terran Dominion's best and brightest, the tip of the spear in the ongoing war against the Lemnorian threat. They would fight, and they would bleed, and some of them would die. But they would never stop, not until the galaxy was safe, not until the sacrifices of heroes like Wayne Cook were given meaning, not until humanity could look to the stars without fear, knowing that the Terran Dominion stood watch, now and always. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.